I was like, wow, this thing about having an internalized stigma, internalized oppression is real, and it's manifesting in the way I show up in the world.
It only usually takes that one time, right? Like your aha moment of like, oh, I said something, nobody laughed at me, nobody questioned me. Oh, maybe I am actually good at this.
Someone invited me to run for office or encouraged me. And I had this sense of duty to all the women who had fought for the opportunity.
How do we undo years and years and years of society and culture telling us that we don't have the agency to do anything with our lives? Well, to be a good entrepreneur, you have to know how to lead yourself, which is sometimes the hardest part, is leading ourselves, right? Because so many of us battle with imposter syndrome.
I don't want to be a bluff, and I also don't want to minimize myself. And what I learned was that a value that I have and in my culture is humility.
I'm so excited to welcome nonprofit leader and leadership consultant Carolina Casañeda del Río here with me today on Auténtica. Bienvenida, Carolina. How are you today?
Doing great, thank you. I'm very excited.
I was so excited that you're here. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing right now?
Yes, I've been working in a nonprofit for all my career, and I am the director of community impact with Social Venture Partners Portland, a local philanthropic nonprofit. And I also do consulting and executive coaching for leaders and nonprofit organizations mainly. And yeah, that's what I do. And be a mom the rest of the time.
The most important, right?
Exactly. The full-time job.
Oh yes, the full-time job on top of your other many things that you do, the many hats that we wear as Latina women sometimes.
Yes.
But how did you end up here? I know that you worked in the nonprofit sector for a really, really long time. How long have you been doing it? When did you start? Tell me a little bit about how Carolina came to be.
Oh, wow. That's a very ample question. Well, I started in nonprofit since I finished college. I studied psychology, and immediately after college, I started working at a nonprofit organization in Mexico that supported children with disabilities and their families. And since then, I worked in nonprofit healthcare for a long time, and then I moved to the U.S. Through an academic exchange. I did my master's in behavioral sciences in Southern Oregon University and University of Guanajuato as an exchange student. And that's how I ended up in Oregon and then in Portland in the last 5.5 years, 6 years, something like that.
Wow. Wait, so you moved to the States when? How many years ago?
About 12 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So that's really not that long ago. How was that change for you? Because Guanajuato to Oregon is huge culture shock, I imagine.
Yes. Yes. Well, I was when I was in Guanajuato and working in nonprofits and talking with the clients that I used to work with, I just realized that I was missing something. I lived in a very, very conservative state, and I worked with people that were living in extreme poverty. So even though my focus was to support the parents of children with disabilities, kind of manage that grief and acceptance of the situation, I think that was the least of their issues. The main issue was domestic violence, extreme poverty, and I felt as if I just was missing something. I was in my fancy office and trying to support these families that lived oppression, systemic oppression. And to me, it felt as if I was helping them cope with that oppression. So additionally, I was a woman in Mexico, and I just saw, I would say, maybe 90% of the clients that I worked with had some level of gender-related violence in their households. So I was kind of in a I wouldn't say hopeless, but more like this can't be this way. I need to like understand life in a different way. And that's how I said, I need to just live in a different culture for a little while and see things differently. And just the exercise of adapting to a different culture, different language, maybe can help me see things in a different way or understand it in a different way. And that's how I started a master's in behavioral sciences and then moved to the US. It was the least of my options to come to the US, but here I am.
Here you are. And is that kind of also the moment that you said, I think I want to do leadership consulting as well? Or what brought you to that journey?
Yeah, well, when I was in Mexico, I was doing some research on internalized stigma related to the disability and how parents internalized messages, stigmatizing messages about disability and how that projected in the way they interacted with their kids and with the world. And when I moved to the US, funny enough, I became a part of a stigmatized community. I became a Latina for the first time. And then I experienced that stigma towards me, also as a woman in Mexico, but more, I would say, evidently. Um, First of all, the moment that I arrived and I started like filling forms, I suddenly became an alien. I became a Latina, and those identities were just very odd to me. And I remember the first day at school in a master's program, they asked me to introduce myself, and I said, I'm Carolina, and I just realized that I'm an alien. So, hello, everybody, Earthlings, I guess. So that was one of the cultural shocks of just being attached identities that I didn't grow up with.
Do you feel like that shift, do you feel like that identity that you had to put down on paper affected your mindset in like a negative way? Because it happens to so many people, right, who immigrate here and they're labeled as something, and because society tells them that they're an alien, then they start to feel like they're not good enough or they can't advance in their careers. Did you go through that?
Yes, and it was going back to your point on how did that lead me to leadership. Part of that was that I realized that there was this situation where I was asked to present to my class. Like it's just a random daily life, college life situation where you're asked to present in front of your class. And in Mexico, I had run for office. I was used to speaking in public or in media. And then all of a sudden, I was in front of my 15 peers and I was so nervous. Like so nervous. I was like rehearsing like crazy and making all this very complex presentation. And I was like shaking and I was just presenting to my peers. So I was like, why do I feel so nervous? I've done things that are more complicated than this before. Why am I so nervous? And I realized that it was because I was in front of an American audience. So there's two things. One is the identity that I was put when I crossed the border. And then the other part is the identity that I grew up with in Mexico and the influence of the US and Europe in how Mexicans see ourselves. So in Mexico, we have a term called malinchismo, which is basically believing that anything and everything that comes from elsewhere in the world, especially Europe and the US, is better, right? So I had crossed with that background, and then I'm called alien, and I'm a Latina, and then I have an accent, and I have to present in front of these Einsteins that were in front of me, that were my peers. And I just thought that, what can I say that they don't already know because they're Americans? The US education is the best in the world. So I had drank that Kool-Aid, and there I was shaking because I thought that I had nothing to contribute.
How did you get through that mindset? Because I'm sure it sounds like you felt like you had to prove something, right? Even though you were there in the same class with them, in the same program, you probably felt like you had to prove that you were on the same level of them. Like, how did you get through that?
Oh, well, I think sometimes that the illusion starts to crack.
Yeah.
Right? So then I realized, like, well, I was in the classes and I was taking some like family counseling classes and stuff, and I had already taken some of those classes. Like education in Mexico is pretty freaking good and very rigorous and disciplined and high standards. And I didn't notice that until I was in class and there was this teacher saying something about a particular family therapy intervention and saying like this is not recommended for blah blah blah, and I was like, I've used it, and I told my friend here like, oh, that's not true, you can use that blah blah blah. And he's like, say it. I was like, and this was a white guy, right, saying me to say that I had something to contribute there. And I was like, how am I going to contradict this professor, master's professor at Southern Oregon University? So I did, and I said, no, actually, you can do this, and this is how you do it. Da, 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 da. And she had nothing to say because it was based in my experience and really good education, and that's where one of the moments where I realized that, oh, actually my education is good. Actually, I have good experience. Oh, I have something to contribute. And from there, I think several other moments where I saw that illusion was cracking, and I was like, wow, this thing about having an internalized stigma, internalized oppression is real, and it's manifesting in the way I show up in the world. And I wonder in how many ways does it show up, right? In my professional life, in my student life, anything and everything, right? So that's how I started paying more attention.
It only usually takes that one time, right? Like your aha moment of like, oh, I said something, nobody laughed at me, nobody questioned me. Oh, maybe I am actually good at this thing. So is that like an exercise that you take your leadership consulting clients to? Like, what do you usually advise if you notice that they're dealing with a similar issue?
Well, first I start analyzing where those beliefs come from, and it's not only just like our personal stories, right? It's not, oh, my mom, my dad, and we blame everything on our parents, but it's like our parents are in a context, and there's narratives that are very repeated in the context where we all live. And so now I know of those narratives, and I can help people see them, not only in their individual lives, but in history. I mean, throughout history and millennia, even the contributions of women have been intentionally buried and attacked. So how on earth are we going to feel confident to speak up because we have been silenced for millennia? So it's not our fault, first of all. It's not the fault of our parents alone. It's like something that has happened historically. However, we do have the agency to do something different. So that's how I approach it with clients or with peers or friends, just like recognizing that we have the agency to be aware and do something different. And the other thing is be that person who would tell the other, like I've always had friends who said, you should apply for this job, you should say that, I should interview you for a podcast. So there's the importance of being that community to others and recognizing the value and the contribution of others and then saying it to them, because sometimes we don't see it ourselves. We need the community.
And the importance of sharing our stories like we're doing right now.
Exactly.
Right. So I think I mentioned this to you, but I've been working on a book called the Book of Awesome Latinas that at this point is going to come out in spring of 2026. But it's essentially a women's history book, 88 profiles of Latinas all across the globe, past and present. And I'm really, history is not really like my area of expertise. This book was commissioned to my friend and I, and the more and more I started digging into these profiles, and you come across the profiles of the first doctor in Nicaragua, the first Latina doctor in Nicaragua, or like the first lawyer who fought for indigenous rights in Peru, right? And you see how much of a lack of information there is about them because nobody cared to document their stories except for maybe the people of our generation that are doing it now, and trying to uncover all of these like secrets that have tried to be erased by their own governments. So everything that you're saying is making complete sense, right? Like, how do we undo years and years and years of society and culture telling us that we don't have the agency to do anything with our lives?
Right. Yeah, and I think that's very beautiful because we're just talking with my partner about and with a friend in Peru who is also like an author, and she just published this book and about stories of women, and just the amount of like saberes and sabidurias that are just veiled or overlooked in history, because we're very used in a culture where there's like a star. There's this one individual who came up with this thing as an original creator of something, and then there's so much wisdom everywhere. But we're used to single out one person and then glorify that person, and it's an individual. So we don't necessarily shed light into the collective of saberes, of wisdom that are there, right? So it's overlooked.
I think that more of us need to, you just gave me a great idea. What if all of us made a book of like all of these saberes from our tias and our moms and our abuelas, like while we can, right? Because even if it's just shared between us, between our immediate community, like imagine how many people that could impact, because all of this great knowledge and advice and just like perspective on the world gets lost, and I look back on this now, and unfortunately all of my grandparents have passed, but I would kill to be able to interview my abuelita about her experience, in Mexico. And she didn't really know her mom. Actually, she died when my abuelita was very young. So like just growing up in that world too. Back in the day, like I would have loved to know more of her story, but not many of us get that opportunity. So I guess call to action for anyone who's watching.
Publish your abuelita story.
Publish the women in your life's stories, because, or at least, talk to them about it, because they do get lost. And that's why we end up in situations where we feel like we can't do anything because we don't know or we don't have the resources. I feel like that kind of gets trickled down because we don't know how they overcame all of these things.
Yes, and yet all of that wisdom continues to be passed on. So I think that you're right. I mean, one thing is it's important to publish, but even despite it's not being published, even despite that is historically intentionally trying to be erased, it's still there. But it just like moves up throughout the cracks, and we still pass the wisdom, and we continue to pass the wisdom despite all those challenges. So that gives me hope too. It's not lost, but it can be more visible.
I feel like a certain amount of it's like passed through our DNA too, right? Even if we don't know, we do know intuitively.
We do know. Exactly. And not only do, like, the written word is not the only way that we can know, right? There's the intuitions, there's so many, like the stories. But yes, it is important to also be a part of the written word, and even like research there's very little research published by people of color, or where the sample of research subjects are actually people of color or Latinos, or just like, then we don't make it into history or the acknowledged history.
Or it's like framed in a certain way, right? If there's media about us that's not actually written or produced by us, they try to shape it a different way. And that, I mean, just take a look at like half of the movies and TV shows that are written about Mexican people.
Right. Exactly. So it is important. We definitely need to be a little bit more outspoken and more intentional about passing on that wisdom, unveiling it, sharing it, and also know that it has not died.
And all of this, at the end of the day, will come back in the way that we see ourselves and the way that we're able to present ourselves as leaders, in corporate environments and also within organizations, also as entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
I think a lot of entrepreneurs who are first starting out have that struggle of like, oh, well, I just started like a very small business. I'm not a leader. Like, I don't see myself as a leader. I've heard that so many times before from my clients. And I'm like, no, but you are. And they're like, oh, well, I don't really have a team. So like, how does that make me a leader? And I'm like, well, to be a good entrepreneur, you have to know how to lead yourself, which is sometimes the hardest part.
Yeah.
Is leading ourselves, right? Because so many of us battle with imposter syndrome or all of these other things that make us feel like we can't do anything, the anxiety of starting something new, being the first to do something in their families. What advice would you give to people who don't see themselves as leaders, but perhaps they're the first to do something in their family, maybe first to go get a master's degree, first to start a business, first to land that corporate job? How can we see ourselves as leaders?
Well, first is kind of question the idea of leader, and I think sometimes we put it as a part of our identity, right? And it's not. I wouldn't say that leader. Your identity is a leader. Is you lead. It's a verb. It's an action. So if you're the first in your family to do blah, or you're leading, right? You don't have to be a leader, and then we have very how do you say, como enquilosadas, very like specific ways in which we see or we imagine a leader, and it's usually like a monolith of characteristics, usually very sometimes masculine in nature, right? Is this one person who is the leader, and when we can lead by inclusion, we can lead through recognizing others, making space for others. Like you're making space for me right now. You're leading by making a space for me to tell my story. So and then I'm leading by telling my story. And we're both leaders here. There's no
competition.
There's no
Right?
competition, but we're so used to saying single out one person as the leader. So I don't know, the advice is to recognize the times where you have led something. And so a lot of the things that I do in the consulting is help people remember how they have led moments in their lives, and then just a personal agency. So anytime that we're taking an initiative and taking like it's agency versus I'm the leader.
Well, it also sounds like we have to internally redefine what leadership means too, right? Because so many of us, like you mentioned, have this idea of what a leader is. And so many times I've heard, well, leaders are the people who boss people around and delegate and do, like, that's a lot of the times like when we see big bosses in movies, right? It's like the people who's like telling other people what to do, and everyone's scared of them, and like we know that's not what leadership is. That's actually quite the opposite,
Right.
in my opinion, right? Leaders are everything that you just said, making space for people to create their own opportunities or amplify their stories or bring people together too. That really is what makes leaders. But the first step, I think, to be able to imagine yourself as a leader is to know that you can be one.
That you already have done it very likely.
Yeah.
And it's just we're not born with insecurity. Also recognizing that insecurity has been constructed around us. So kind of like cracking that idea, Like we're born like everything is a possibility. We can do anything and everything. So we little by little throughout our lives learn that we are not capable. That we so very likely in your life there's a moment where you have led something. So it's not both the potential and the fact that you already have done it.
Yeah. Do you remember that moment for you where you realized, oh, I've already led something. I'm a leader. Maybe it's happened a couple of times, because I imagine in Mexico, when you ran for office, you had to have had that moment.
Speaking of imposter syndrome,
tell me more. Tell me more about that. I want to hear about that. Well, what was that experience like?
Well, the thing is that, again, I was invited by a friend, encouraged to run for office. So again, it's like so important to have a community who sees something in you, because otherwise I wouldn't have thought, like I didn't even know what a representative did. But I was in a meeting to support this candidate that was kind of born from like the people, like it was not a history politician, it was not an elected official with a lot of political experience. So I was there to support that person. And then they were looking for candidates for representatives that were women. So yeah, and we can talk about how flawed they were as a system, that they didn't have already a bunch of women ready to run for office, right? But so someone invited me to run for office or encouraged me. And I had this sense of duty to all the women who had fought for the opportunity to others for run for office. And I was like, I was working full-time, studying full-time. So I'm like, where on earth am I going to now fit a political campaign? I don't even know how to do it. I don't have like anything. But like I'm also a person who will just throw herself into very uncomfortable situations, knowing that I'm gonna learn something about myself and about life, right? So that's how I did it, and it was hard. It was really hard to just like lead a campaign with like no team and just a few little people that believed in me for some reason, and then like, and my campaign was very grassroots. I didn't want to fundraise because I was like, in Mexico you pay taxes for political parties to have candidates, and so I was like, where is that money? Anyway, so I was doing very grassroots, and my campaign was more based on talking to people and listening to people. And to me, it was an experience of learning and going to all these communities and learning about the challenges, and being a psychologist or a counselor. To me, I was very curious about their lives. And so it was a hard experience, and another moment where I learned that, oh, actually I could do this, being surrounded by people who were already elected officials, and for some reason I had thought that they were Einsteins, or they knew something very like particular, or were experts in something, and no, they were just people. So I was like, oh yeah, I can do this, and I also could do it well. I am able to actually be an elected official who cares, who can move things, because the people who were surrounding me were like, I was surprised about just the level of corruption, of ignorance about the community, of just carelessness. So it was another moment where that illusion cracked. The illusion of not being enough or not being able to lead was cracking too.
You just made me think, I hope that more people can be open to seeing when the illusion cracks, right? But I know a lot of people who, they see the illusion cracking in front of them and they want to believe in this so badly that, like, the people who really have like a lot of immigrant guilt and like they lack the ability to, or they lack the confidence, I think, to believe that the people that they've been looking up to can be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but it's really hard to watch, because there have been situations where people that I love have been very mistreated in their jobs by these leaders who were clearly just very racist and classist towards them. And I just wish that how do you navigate that, right? When the people who you look up to start to like not seem so great at the end of the day, like how do you crack that?
Yeah. I think going back to when we have a very rigid idea of a leader and as an identity, we stop seeing the leaders as humans. So we distance ourselves, and then they project all the good things, all the ability, the knowledge, the wisdom to that person up there in the pedestal, and then we strip ourselves, or we have learned to strip ourselves of that agency and that like wisdom, all of that. It's all in the leader. So I think it's important to recognize that people in positions of leadership are also human and make mistakes. And when we are in a position of leadership, to remember that. I think also when you take a position of leadership, is very seductive to believe that illusion, right?
Yeah.
Then you're like, oh, you are the one who knows. You are the one who will tell us what to do. And then you're invited into that illusion and playing the game where you are that guru that has to tell people what to do because you're the boss now, right? And so I think it's just kind of cracking that idea of the leader as an identity, and as a rigid identity, and then recognizing that like we all lead all the time, and when we reclaim that power, then we can see that this boss is being an asshole, and recognize, well, he's human, or they're human, and they're making a mistake, and I don't need to accept this invitation where he's treating me in a way that is not acknowledging my dignity. And I can lead by standing up and leaving, or just setting a boundary, or many ways that you can deal with that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's such a good way to think about it too, because I think a lot of us, especially when we're the first ones to do something, it's hard to see things that way. Because a lot of us look for guidance in any place that we can grasp at when we're first starting. And the first person who gives us an opportunity, it might seem great on paper, but it's not always that great.
Yeah, we're all like messy people. Come on. I mean, yes, I was given the opportunity to be like, I was in a very high leadership position in a nonprofit, and I was given the opportunity. That doesn't mean that you can just mistreat me because you offered an opportunity. Like it's very different. We're talking about different things. I can still be thankful to you for the job, and I can also still recognize my dignity and not let you mistreat me. That's not opposite. So when going to this point, when I felt somewhat like stuck in my professional life, and I was trying to like actually apply for a better job because I had 2 graduate degrees, and I think I was doing like good in my job, but I just felt very stuck in my career. So I started applying to dream jobs, right? And I was like, oh my God, I would blush just thinking about getting this salary. Like, well, and then I applied, and then people encouraged me to apply, and blah, blah, blah. And I was given this opportunity. And I remember going to counseling because I was like, I know that my internalized oppression will get in the way when it comes to negotiating my salary. So I like meeting a counselor, of course, sought the support of a counselor, and it's like, help me with like, how am I going to do that? And I don't want to be a bluff, and I also don't want to minimize myself. And what I learned was that a value that I have and in my culture is humility. Like we're a collectivistic culture where, and also particularly women, you don't brag about stuff. you don't, in Mexico, you don't have to write a letter of personal statement to a university saying how great you are and why you should be chosen instead of others. To me, that was a cultural shock too. So to me, like the value of my culture of humility was there, but it was manifesting as being showing up as accepting humiliation. So what I learned or what I discovered about myself in that process was that I was accepting humiliation while I was really trying to be humble. So recognizing humility doesn't mean that, again, you will accept less than what you can contribute, and also you don't have to like be the star, the only star, to be able to just occupy a space that is dignified or dignifying. You know.
I now see all of the pieces of like how you've come to be a leadership consultant and why people would want to work with you, because you've gone through so many phases and so many pivots and so gracefully and just like fearlessly that I think so many people would have so much to learn from you and just like your perspective on things. And I'm sure your psychology background also helps quite a bit.
Yeah.
What do you feel like is next for you?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't say that is fearlessly. I like, so yes, it's more like it's curiously. And I think many times I've felt fearful and insecure. And when I feel, especially when I feel fearful and insecure, is when I say, I have to do this because I want to challenge that belief, right? So yes, I would say, what is next? I don't know what is next. I think I'm enjoying the work that I do. I love working with nonprofits. I continue to do consulting. My consulting practice is my space of creativity, and I work with a team that is like of amazing Latino, spiritual, wise people, and we're doing really cool stuff with organizations. And so what is next is to continue to nurture that, and just like keep experimenting life.
What do you feel like is the impact that you want to create with your consulting? Let's just say in like the next 5 years. I know that's a hard question.
I think I think the impact or the aspiration is to continue to recognize the cracks along with others, and building. Once we recognize those cracks that we've led to believe, build and co-create something different together. So that's what I want for especially leaders of color or Latinas leaders, that we don't have to drink the Kool-Aid. We can create a different thing.
Yeah, we can pave our own paths.
We can pave our own paths together. And it's so important to have a community, be a community to others. And we can just co-create something better and more meaningful, together.
And do that by being curious. I think
Yes, being curious
that's like the
about
biggest takeaway for me right now. Is
Good.
like, don't confuse being humble with being humiliated, because nobody wants that.
Uh-huh.
And also that we have the agency to create the path that we want to create, and that we can do it scared, but we have to be curious enough to kind of tackle that.
Yes, worst case scenario, you will learn something about yourself, something new. So yeah, I love curiosity.
That's how we grow at the end of the day, right?
Yes,
That's how we grow as people. I think that's the name of your book.
Ah,
Be curious.
oh,
That sounds good.
I love that.
That's
I think
we'll
love
work
is
on it.
curiosity. So yes,
We'll work on it. All right.
Yeah.
Where can people find and connect with you? What's the best way?
yes. So you can go to my website is www.evolveinternational.consulting. And then you can always Google SVP Portland, Social Venture Partners Portland is the organization that I work with, and we do really cool stuff. You should check it out.
Can confirm they do really cool stuff.
Yes. I think those are the two. And I don't know, is there anything else that my email or like
LinkedIn?
LinkedIn? Oh gosh, I don't know what's the link, but is there a way to add it to the...
Yes, we can definitely add all of the information. And again, this is Carolina Casañeda del Río. And thank you so much for being on Auténtica. We're really excited to be able to share your story.
Yes, thank you so much for the invitation and the cafecito. The agüita.
Gracias.
Gracias.